Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think People.
Think People is made possible in part by support from the Community Foundation of the Gunnison Valley. To learn how you can make a difference, visit cfgv.org. The Community Foundation, we're here for good.
Become a Think Radio Presents partner at patreon.com, and you'll also get access to premium content you won't find anywhere else. Join us today. My guest today is best-selling author Anne Hillerman. Anne is a veteran writer and journalist in her own right, but she's also the daughter of crime fiction legend Tony Hillerman. He is best known for his immensely popular series of detective novels set in Navajo country in the desert Southwest. His books feature two main characters who were members of the Navajo tribal police, Chee and Joe Leaphorn. Tony Hillerman died in 2008, and the series seemingly came to an end. That is, until Anne decided that the world should not be without Chee and Leaphorn after all. She revived it, but with a voice and a twist all her own. A relatively minor female character in Tony's stories, Bernadette Manuelito, became for Anne the perfect new detective to carry the tradition forward. The fifth installment of Anne Hillerman's Manuelito stories, still set in the rich world her father created, is scheduled for release in spring 2019. Anne, thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Okay.
I guess I shouldn't say that till we've done the interview.
Good point. I mean, I don't think I've had anybody who would say they were tortured, but there's always a first time. And I'm going to come right straight out of the gate and do the typical sort of fan geek thing and say that I have been a lifelong fan of these stories. First, reading your father's books, I think I read A Thief of Time first and then went back and caught up on the series and then made sure to read every single one. I look for them faithfully at thrift stores and so forth. These are some of my favorite books, my favorite stories. So there, I said it. I'm a geek and really happy to be talking with you because a lot of people can say that they took over the family business, right?
Right.
But wow, when you take over the family business and it's this amazing string of best-selling books, and then you just pick right up where they left off and go. What is that like? Talk to me.
Well, there was some pressure, I have to say. I think a lot of people, when they're writing a first novel, they work hard on it, and it comes out, and their mom reads it, and their friends read it, and maybe their friends read it. But usually there's some leeway there. If it's not the best book in the world, people understand, well, this is a first novel. She's a sweet kid. We'll give her another chance. But my dad set really high standards. He had won probably every award for mystery fiction.
Right.
I mean, he was a huge big deal. And I knew when my first book, Spider-Woman's Daughter, came out, and people would look at it, and they would probably see the word Hillerman. They would think, oh, thank goodness, the series is not dead. Tony must have had. And then they would see the word Anne. They'd think, who is this?
What's
this
going on here?
Exactly. So there was some pressure. I knew that, and since I had never written a novel, a lot of there was the external pressure, me imagining what people how high their expectations were.
Yeah.
And then there was the internal pressure of never having written a novel and really wanting it to be the best it could be.
Of course. Sure.
There's only, no matter what you do, you just have one chance to make a first impression. So that's why I was really lucky that my dad had created a minor character whom I loved and had never really brought her into the main arena of crime solving. So that character gave me a way to make the books to still be true to the standards that Dad had followed in terms of Navajo police, not a lot of graphic violence. no sex, or maybe a kiss, but nothing.
Well, these are
nothing
not
beyond
gratuitous in any way.
No. They're not like a lot of novels.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I knew I had to be true to those standards, but I knew too I had to do something to give it my own voice, because I knew I could never be Tony Hillerman. So
Yeah, well, who could?
it was it was a leap of faith. And I figured the worst thing that can happen is I will spend a couple years writing this book. And my mom was my dad's first editor, and really his best critic, very gentle critic. But I mean, she was the godmother of all those characters. So I thought, well, I'll show it to my mom, and if she says, then that'll be it. If she doesn't really like it, because I knew how gentle she was, and I thought anything less than superlative praise means that this book did not make the mark. So after a couple years, before I showed it to anybody, I showed it to her, partly too because I knew she was really invested in those characters, and I didn't want to do anything that would make her uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
well, did she even know that you were writing the book?
I mentioned to her that I thought I would try it, partly because like a lot of Dad's fans, I was missing those characters.
Oh, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. So anyway, she said, "Oh, sure, go ahead, give it a shot." So I remember I gave her the manuscript on a Friday, and I thought, well, I'll give her a couple weeks. She'll want to take her time with this. And then she called me on Monday, and I thought, oh no, I must have left out some pages, or there was, something happened to the technology part of it. But no, she said, "Oh, honey, I read it, and I love it, and I think your dad would be proud of you."
Oh, my goodness.
So that was like, I didn't care what Library Journal or Kirkus or anybody said after that. I thought,
doesn't get
it doesn't
any
matter.
better than that.
It doesn't.
Well,
it doesn't.
So here you are, a first novelist, and you're still having this mom experience, right? like most of us do.
Right, it doesn't matter how old you are.
But in this case, you've got a mom with real authority. When she says she liked it, that actually meant something.
That's right. And she said she liked it. And I think not so much as my mom as my dad's editor.
Yeah.
So that was
that
was huge.
Keeper of the legacy, really.
Exactly.
And so were there any things that she said to you at that point, except for this, you should really think about? No, she did not. There was nothing. And like I said, my mom was a very gentle critic. And she then gave me back the manuscript. And there were things that she had marked, like, a little question mark in pencil, which made me think that part really stank, I understand that entirely. It's very, it's the faint praise that stands out the worst, right?
That's right. If somebody says, "Oh, that was interesting."
Yeah.
No.
Well, what were you thinking there? Okay, I'll go back and rethink. So for the fans of Tony Hillerman books, but who maybe have not discovered Anne Hillerman books, who is this character? Which character did you pull out?
Well, her name is Bernadette Manuelito. Dad introduced her as a rookie cop. Her car is stuck in the mud. Jim Chee has to come and rescue her. And you can tell right from the beginning that she has a crush on Jim Chee. So she kind of is that ingenue young lady who needs to be rescued character for 3 or 4 books. And then she goes down to work for the Border Patrol. And she does pretty well down there, except, again, the way Dad structured the story, she gets in a problem and Jim Chee rescues her. And then she goes down to the Grand Canyon, and that's in Skeleton Man, Dad's second to last book. And in that book, she finds a woman who's been kidnapped. She finds the bad guys. She finds a whole bunch of stolen diamonds. Basically, she has solved the crime. But because Dad loved those male characters, then there's a flash flood, and Jim Chee rescues her and saves the day.
Well, that was his generation, wasn't it?
It really was. And he often said that he had some trouble writing about women characters.
Yeah. Why do you think that's true? Why was it so hard for that generation of writers?
That is an excellent question. I don't know. I mean, my dad, I'm one of 3 daughters. He had a big sister, and my mom, he was married for 60 years. He had good experiences with women. So I don't, and with interest, a lot of different kinds of women with interesting backgrounds. So I don't know.
Well,
But I think, let me just
please.
continue.
Yeah.
He read Raymond Chandler. He read a lot of those kind of hard-boiled detective stories where you have the white male, urban setting, bottle of bourbon in the desk drawer. And I think that was sort of the kind of mysteries that shaped him from an early age.
Sure, the Humphrey Bogart sort of picture.
Yeah. And, he did fine. I mean, nobody said to him, I said to him after I read Skeleton Man, I said, Dad, I think people would really love to see this Bernadette Manuelito character take the next step and be on the same level as your male detectives. But he didn't. He didn't agree with me. He didn't say it. He just said, "Oh, honey, that's a sweet idea."
Well, you know what? I'm going to speak for everyone listening and say we'll forgive him that.
I think so.
But I'm really glad that now you've picked it up. So what was it in particular about this character, other than that she seemed to be sort of on the fringe most of the time? What really intrigued you and made you say, I want to get in her head?
Well, first of all, the Navajo, there is a long tradition of strong women in the Navajo culture. The book that I just finished concerns, it's called The Tale Teller, and it concerns another strong woman, a woman named, her American name was Juanita, and she was the wife of the Navajo leader Manuelito, who is not related to Bernie, unfortunately. But anyway, she was also a weaver, and she outlived her husband and really was a pivotal person in the development of the modern Navajo Nation. So there's that whole thread in the Navajos of women who have power, who are smart, who basically run the show, who have their own money. And, in the old days, if a woman and her husband were going to get divorced, she would just move his stuff outside the hogan, and that's like, see ya, bye.
Done deal.
So that was part of it. I just thought it's very much in keeping the Navajo tradition to have Bernie rise to a position of power.
Yeah, and it's a matrilineal lineal culture, right?
Right.
So that's not a stretch by any means.
No.
So clearly you were immersed in the stories, the characters, the culture because of your father's writing. But you're also really immersed in the place because you call yourself a first novelist, but you've been writing a long time.
Yeah.
Place-based writing.
Right.
How did that really play into your ability to sit down and really authentically write these stories?
Well, as I mentioned, I'd started out as a journalist, and I did that for about 20 years. And often the progression from journalism is then somebody calls you and say, oh, we need a travel guide about your city, and it's what they call work for hire. So, you don't make much money, but it's kind of fun, and it's a good way to get your first byline on a book. So I had done that, and I had done I used to be the restaurant critic for the Albuquerque Journal and for the New Mexican. So I did a little restaurant book. And then I did a book about the places that my dad wrote about in Navajo land. My husband is a professional photographer. So we spent, maybe a year and a half. First of all, I reread all of Dad's novels. And probably like you or a lot of his fans, the first time I read them, I really read them for the story. But this time I was able to take a deep breath and read them for the skill of the writing and for those really luscious descriptions.
Of course.
And so when my husband and I were driving through Navajo land, we were looking for the scenery that matched the description. So say Jim Chee is leaving the Shiprock station, driving to Gallup, and it's sunset, and he's looking. There's wonderful volcanic necks along. It's called 491. And so, he's looking at them. So then we would drive and get pictures of them, trying to even get them at sunset. So all of that really, really, I'd been to those places before, but never sort of with a writer's eye for them.
Yes.
So that made a huge difference, too.
Yeah. Well, and I bring up the issue of place because, there's a lot of detective fiction out there, really good stuff. But it doesn't seem to matter much whether the story takes place in San Francisco or Philadelphia or New York. The story isn't changed. I don't think that's true of Tony Hillerman books.
No.
I mean, these stories could not happen anywhere else. The landscape is pivotal. Do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
And do
yeah.
you think that that's sort of something that's missing from some fiction, that really all stories should reference their place maybe more strongly than they do?
Well, I love to read stories that have a sense of place.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite authors is James Lee Burke. And sometimes not even so much for the story as for the way he describes Louisiana, or now I think has some books that are up in Montana too. The way, I mean, you can smell the swamps, you can feel the humidity. And sometimes it doesn't, some of the stories maybe are a little more violent than I would like, but I don't mind that because I just love that kind of setting. But I think every writer has his or her own motivation for doing the stories they do.
Yeah.
But I think if I was setting a story, say in Philadelphia, I would want to get into some of the history and some of the, wonderful historic places that could then be part of the mystery, rather than just having it be another urban, gang killing or whatever it would be.
And that's not so much criticism as just a challenge. Put us there.
Yeah.
Let me hear it. Let me smell it. And your work and your father's work does such a good job of that.
Well, Dad did 2 books that were not in the Jim Chee Joe Leaphorn series. One was a book called Finding Moon, which is set in Vietnam. And when Dad wrote that book, Americans still could not go to Vietnam as tourists. It was right after, or maybe even during must have been right after the Vietnam War. So Dad had to go to the Philippines instead. And he was really worried that he wouldn't have that same kind of tropical feeling in that book. So when my husband and I were doing that book about, we called it Tony Hillerman's Landscape. Originally, we were going to include Finding Moon. So we went to Vietnam, and I have to say he nailed it. Even though it was the Philippines, he got that kind of lush jungle, sort of the sense of tension. Am I really safe here? What's going on? It was...
Yeah, even without a war, am I safe right here?
That's right.
That's a good
even
point.
without a war, and even without actually having been in Vietnam, he was at that point, I think, a skilled enough writer that he could extrapolate and probably watched a few movies. I never talked to him about that book, but yeah, it goes back to what you were saying about how a sense of place was always really important in his writing.
Well, when he started writing the Joe Leaphorn and Jim Chee stories, I think the country's sensitivity to what we now call cultural appropriation was less. It wasn't quite the issue that it has become. Did you worry at all about picking up these stories? I mean, truly, you're a white woman writing from the perspective of Native American people and culture, their thoughts, their feelings, their beliefs. Did that give you any pause? Did you think, is this the right time for this?
It probably should have. No, because I was thinking of the world that Dad had created, which is a fictional Navajo world. But I do have Navajo consultants who help me stay out of trouble. I work with a retired Navajo sergeant who has now segued into doing a lot of work with nonprofits that deal with domestic violence and a lot of things that are kind of parallel to what you'd run into in law enforcement. And then I have another consultant who was once considered to be the Navajo chief of police. The book I just finished, The Taleteller, one of my consultants is the Navajo gal who's the curator at the museum there. So, and I'm sure there are things in my book that some Navajo people don't like. But when I give talks, when I do book signings, usually if there are Navajo people in the audience, particularly women, I notice that they will come up and want to have their picture taken with me and the book, and they'll want me to sign the book for their mother or their grandmother. When I was in Farmington, there was a gal. She was probably 40. She had a daughter who was maybe 12, and then her mom, who was probably my age. And she had somebody take a picture of all 4 of us together. So I think, I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure there are things that Navajo people might think I shouldn't be writing about. But by and large, I have been welcomed very graciously, and I really, really appreciate that.
This is your 4th title or your 5th now?
The one coming out is the 5th.
Is the 5th. And all of these have been on the bestseller lists, right?
Right.
So clearly the fan community picked them up. What are you hearing from those fans? What did they say about the continuation?
A lot of them said it's about time that there's a woman who steps forth and does some good crime solving. A lot of them liked the fact that besides having Bernadette Manuelito as a working law enforcement person, Bernie has a mom who gives her plenty of advice that she doesn't really need and has some health issues and even though she's supportive of Bernie's career, can't understand why Bernie can't always come to dinner on weekends. And then I gave Bernie a little sister who's really a handful. And people like that. They say this is kind of what all of us face who are working in the world today. It's not just if you're a detective, you go to work and you solve a crime and you go home and look at the stars and go back to work tomorrow. You're trying to balance all of these other elements of life. So people have said they like that.
Yeah, well, it's real.
Yeah.
In that sense. So here's a reversal question for you. Did you consider creating a strong male character in these books? Because you just listed all of these wonderful females.
There already are. But actually, I did create, Bernie has a clan brother who is working at the police station, Officer Bigman. And he is a strong, kind of a real stand-up guy. In The Taleteller, I guess I shouldn't give too much away, but there is a baby in the works, but it isn't Bernie's.
Aha.
But anyway, that was I had some fun with that, kind of toning down the tension that you have to build as a mystery and switching to something that was a little lighter and gave me a chance to put some humor in the story.
Yeah. Well, and look, as a female writer, it's not just about the female characters who in some cases, you'll see this, whether it's a book or a movie. Okay, suddenly we have a strong female character who looks for all the world, looks, acts, and talks like a man. Right? Did you find it challenging? You wanted to create this strong female character. Were there any times where you had to draw yourself back and say, wait, that's not how a woman would do this?
No, actually, if anything, some of my readers would say, wait a minute, you're making her too soft. You need to remember that she is a police officer here. You need to give her a little stronger backbone. And I in a lot of times in my first drafts, I thought she was plenty strong, but I really appreciated that viewpoint. So, yeah, it's interesting as a writer. You put your first thoughts together, and there's your draft, and you think, oh, this is so good, and then you show it to people, and they say, well, why didn't you do such and such, and why didn't you? And they say, here she has her gun in the car, and here she's pulling it out of her holster. What happened? It's like. I really appreciate the support that I've gotten from my writer friends, from my agent, from editors. I think a lot of times people think writing a novel, it's just you and your imaginary friends. And for me, that's true in the beginning. And of course, you have to do research if you're writing about a place you don't know or a topic you're not familiar with. But then after that, I think the more, at least for me, the more collaborative the process has been, the more satisfied I've been with the results in the end.
Well, yeah, I think that stereotype needs to go away. There's always a good editor behind a good book, right?
Yeah.
And a good community of fact checkers and so forth.
And I think sometimes beginning writers particularly are every word has been so heartfelt that they're a little too protective of the, it's like they don't seem to realize that this is a collaboration and that everybody can learn something from somebody else.
Well, once the book is published, it's a collaboration with your audience.
Exactly.
Right? The experience itself, we're no longer creating it.
Yeah. I think the other kind of the parallel point to this is that you are ultimately the one who decides what you accept and what you reject from things that your fans may say, things that editors may say, things that some bookseller may tell you. Whatever, you are in charge of it. So you can say yes or no, or I'll think about it.
Well, give me an example of a time where you had to say, no, I disagree with that entirely. We're keeping it the way it is, even though maybe you were hearing it from multiple people.
Well, I just got a rather snarky little email from some guy saying, I don't understand why you hate environmentalists. And he was criticizing me in Rock with Wings, my second book. One of the plots involves this Navajo guy who his kids want him to lease some land to a company that wants to put up solar panels. And he says, no, I'm not going to do it because that's my view of Shiprock. And somehow this guy extrapolated that from there I was anti-environment. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to write him back and say, no, I'm not. And thanks for your comment. And it turned out it was a fake email.
Fake?
When I sent it out, it bounced right back saying no such address. Weird, huh?
Well, that's not a problem your dad ever had to deal with.
No.
Fake emails and trolls leaving comments on your website and so forth.
No, he got real letters in the mail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, and I always like to take time when sharing a conversation with an author to give you an opportunity to speak to aspiring writers, those that are halfway through their first draft, or they've written 3 novels that are still sitting in their dresser drawer, or just kicking around an idea. What would you say to those people?
The first thing I would say is read everything you can. Read people who inspire you. Read those kind of books that you stay up until 2 o'clock because you can't put them down. And after you've read it once, give it a while and then read it again. And this time read it, try to figure out why did you like it so much? What really worked for it? And that not that you would copy that, but just that somehow intrinsically that good writing becomes part of your mindset.
Mm-hmm.
I would say take advantage of writers' conferences, any sort of opportunity you have. And I think online is fine, but I think particularly if it gives you a chance to meet people face to face. Because not only will you learn from those people, but when time comes that you're actually ready to publish your book, they might remember you. Like I remember people who I've met at conferences, and they send me their manuscript, and I'm happy for them. And I'm glad to say, you should read this book because so-and-so really understands rural Oklahoma in the 1930s, or, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say don't beat yourself up too much. I mean, remember, you're just learning, but keep at it, because the more you do it, usually the better you'll get. And I guess I would say, too, if you have people whose opinions you really value, show them your work in progress and see what they say. But like we were saying earlier, don't take everything they say as gospel.
Yes.
Just weigh it with your own ideas. And, and I guess the other thing is don't be in too much of a hurry. I think it takes time. Just like if you're, say, making sauerbraten, you put all the spices in, and then you have to let it sit in your refrigerator for 2 or 3 days. It's like, on a much larger scale, a book is kind of like that.
Well, sure. I think that maybe even the more apt comparison would be wine, which takes much longer than
wine,
that,
yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
That's a really good point, that we expect ourselves to crank out something overnight.
Yeah.
But to your point of showing it to people, do you find that you should be very careful to whom you show a work in progress? Because the wrong person can really derail what was otherwise a viable book.
Right. Well, a lot of writers are in writers' critique groups. And the good thing about that is usually those groups work, if they meet once a week or once a month, everybody in the group is expected to have something new to show the rest of the group. So that kind of goes back to having a deadline, which makes you move, even if it's a snail's pace, you're doing something new. So that part of it is good. But some problem that I've noticed with those groups is that people think that everybody should write just like they do. So, they'll be critical of somebody who maybe has a different voice, whereas that voice may be the perfect voice for the story that they're telling.
Yeah.
So I think you have to use some judgment in what you're accepting and rejecting when you get criticism or even compliments.
Well, that's the other side of that coin. An interesting point there, and maybe something worth saying, is if you are a member of a writers group, you have a responsibility to be very careful with the kind of critique that you give.
You do. You absolutely do.
And if you're the one receiving the critique, be careful how much of it you take to heart.
Right. That's right.
You're the boss.
Yeah.
Are you going to keep writing these? Do you have a timeline? Do you have this one comes out soon.
That's right. It comes out April 9th.
Wow.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there others in the pipeline?
Yes, this book is part of a 3-book contract.
Uh-huh.
So I'm working now on the second book in that contract, and then there's one more, and I don't know after that. But I know for now I'm really enjoying it, and yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well, and the fans are enjoying it, so hard to go wrong there.
Right. I just feel so lucky to be able to basically reinvent myself, towards the end of midlife and be doing something that I really, really love.
Okay, so now
Yeah.
there's a piece of advice we might add to that list of excellent points that you made, and that is, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what stage of life. If you've got a story to tell, tell it.
That's right. That's right. I mean, a lot of people, particularly journalists, I think, people who work with words, have a dream that someday they'll write a novel. And I know that was true of my dad. But it wasn't true for me. I was writing, I was still doing journalism, and I was writing nonfiction books, and I was trucking along perfectly happy. But then I thought, how can the world go on without Jim Chee and Joe Leaphorn?
That's a great question.
And with Bernie being forever stuck as the girlfriend who brings the coffee. So
we can't leave her there.
no, we couldn't. So that was sort of what motivated me to make this change, and I'm so glad I did. Yeah.
And so am I.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And thanks for the conversation. Appreciate it very much.
Oh, I enjoyed it tremendously. Thank you.
Think Radio Presents is a production of Alan Morris Media. The show's producer is Isa Forrest. Associate producer, Aaron Lewis.
Thanks for listening. Become a Think Radio Presents partner at patreon.com, and you'll also get access to premium content you won't find anywhere else. To leave a comment on today's show or to suggest a great story for a future episode, visit thinkradiopresents.com. Tune in next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think People.